Shout out to G-Man Boxing.
This past weekend, Joseph Parker beat Derek Chisora. Beat him soundly in my opinion, although the scorecards were quite disturbingly close. But in that fight, we seen improvements from Joseph Parker, improvements that we needed to see. Now, there is still a bit of a way to go. But lest we forget, Joseph Parker, although he's been around for, God, it seems like forever now at this stage, he's not even 30 yet. Most heavyweights tend to really come into their peak at the age of, well, sometimes above 30, 32, 33 in some cases. So Joseph Parker still has a lot to learn. There's still a lot that can improve with him, and there is still things they can improve on. But it's been an interesting career, hasn't it? It's been interesting to see his development. And I feel we need to have a little chat and have a look back on some of the key moments of his career. So let's do it. It's not quite a WTF happened because we're not at the end of his career, but right now let's just see. What's the deal with Joseph Parker? Alright, so Joseph Parker, coming from New Zealand, was born in South Auckland, New Zealand, and he did have an amateur background, he did. Now on BoxRec he's only listed as having 30 fights in the amateurs. Now he did have more than that, but I think BoxRec only tend to count kind of senior level amateur bouts. Now a name that we'll see here that he fought in the pros as well is Junior Fa. Now the first meeting between them two, as far as I'm aware, was in 2009 at the New Zealand National Championships final. Lost that to Junior Fa. Went on then to compete in the Commonwealth Games. Actually beat Fraser Clark along the way. Fraser Clark is a heavyweight who has just turned pro a boxer. He competed in the Olympic Games just gone there. And also along the way, in a lot of these youth events, the 2010 AIB World Championships, he actually lost close enough fight to Filip Hrgovic. Fought guys like Tony Yoka. These were kind of in the youth games, and it's crazy to think that Joseph Parker, we talk about like Hrgovic and Yoka as kind of guys who are, knocking at the door at world level, and Parker, who was fighting them in these youth games, he's already kind of been there, worn a t-shirt. We're trying to see kind of where he goes from here. Also fought guys like Zhilei Zhang. Lost that fight actually to Zhilei Zhang. Could you imagine Parker versus Zhilei Zhang now? Oh, I wouldn't. I think we all know how that would go. But that was kind of Joseph Parker's amateur career in a nutshell. Like that, there were some names there that you'll definitely recognise. But he turned pro. When he turned pro, he would have only been about kind of 20, 21 years old. And most of Joseph Parker's early fights, apart from one, it was this fight here against Bryce Coe, which was in America. I think that was in Las Vegas. No, it was in California actually, but that was the only fight he had at the time outside of New Zealand. Now, I didn't watch this fight, but I do remember hearing about it. I know I didn't know who Joseph Parker was at the time of this fight, but he fought Francois Botha. Now, it would have been his sixth pro fight at the time he fought Francois Botha. Now, that was probably the first time I ever heard that. Now, I didn't see the fight, but I knew who Francois Botha was, but I knew in 2013 Francois Botha shouldn't be anywhere near the ring, and he was fighting a kind of, at the time I heard the name Joseph Parker, but I didn't really give it two minds, because at the time, like, I was, quite a bit into boxing, but this was kind of the time where, you still had the likes of, I was looking at more so the likes of Tyson Fury, kind of, who was up and coming at the time. I think this was just before just after he fought Steve Cunningham. Not long after, anyway. And, David Price, who was on the comeback trail after the knockout of Tony Thompson. I was hearing about Anthony Joshua. Kind of things like that were kind of more in my mind, the heavyweight division, than Joseph Parker versus Francois Botha. If you look at that fight, Francois Botha literally, and I know it's Christmas, but he looked like Santa. He really did. I mean, like, he literally, I know that's, but he genuinely looked like Santa Claus in there. He had the kind of greyish beard, he was overweight, really overweight, and Joseph Parker dispatched him with relative ease in 2 rounds. The guys he was fighting when he was turning over, Dante Patty, who was 0-1, Richard Takui, who was 20-21, Terry Tutru, who was 0-9. Not exactly stellar opposition, but as is so often the case, it's very rare that it's very rare that they're going to feast them on anyone kind of decent. So the name that kind of jumps out there is Francois Botha. And in his 7th fight, he won the New Zealand National Boxing Federation title against Afa Taputu. So he's kind of fighting all these kind of guys from kind of, Australia, the Oceanic kind of region specifically. But the first real time I really took note of Joseph Parker was this next fight here, which was in 2014. It was actually April 26, 2014 against Marcelo Massachiamento. Now, this was a fairly run-of-the-mill kind of fight for Joseph Parker. He got rid of the guy in 7 rounds. But the interesting part about this is that it was actually on the undercard of Vladimir Klitschko versus Alex Leopold. If you go back and look at that. And really then, that was kind of when I started. Like, I remember hearing the name. I was like, oh, Joseph Parker, because when I boxed record, he was like, oh, he's the guy who fought Francois Botha, when Francois Botha looked like Santa Claus. But when you looked at him, you kind of saw this. Now, he definitely looked slimmer. The fight before, he was only 219, and then he was 238, but he definitely looked a lot slimmer than he's more bulky now, Joseph Parker, definitely more bulky. But the hand speed was something that jumped out at you. He did look to be explosive, and at that time, Joseph Parker was letting his hands go. He was looking impressive, and then he fought Brian Mintu. Now, Brian Mintu, really a cruiserweight, let's be frank. I mean, he was 209 pounds. He'd been beaten by guys like Dillian Whyte. Really a cruiserweight who was just campaigning heavyweight. Remember that Joseph Parker dispatch? He had him down a couple of times in that fight. Beat Keith Thompson, Sharon Williams. Now, Sharon Williams is very tough. I think he's from the Bahamas and somewhere. I'm not sure whereabouts. Could be Nassau or somewhere like that. But an incredibly tough man. I think he's only ever been stopped once. So Joseph Parker went the distance with him. But he's a veteran. Like, Williams is as tough as they come. As tough as all boots, I forget who it was who stopped him. But he's really, really incredibly tough. So these were kind of guys. Joseph Parker was very active at this stage as well. I mean, like 2014, he fought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He fought 5 times that year. And the more he was fighting, the more we were starting to talk about him, the more we were starting to see him, and we started tuning in. Like, a lot of these fights, as I say, were in New Zealand. He was really getting, New Zealand were really getting behind their man, because for the first time, pretty much since David Tua, there hadn't really been any New Zealand heavyweights that kind of came about since David Tua. And you had a chance, because again, at this time, Klitschko was obviously still champion, but I think everyone in the boxing world knew that Klitschko is either going to retire, because he hadn't lost the Fury at this stage, or someone's going to beat him, and maybe then belts will get fragmented, and potentially Parker could pick something up, because as I said, he did look good. And one thing he was doing a lot of was he was defending the WBO Oriental heavyweight title, which was giving him quite a high ranking with the WBO sanctioning body. Now, also at the time, he was actually gaining quite a high ranking with the IBF, with their sanctioning body. Now, he wasn't mandatory in 2015. At the time, it was, I can't remember the guy's name now, but I can't remember his name, but I remember he fought Charles Martin, blew his knee out. His name escapes me. I think it was Vyacheslav something. Was it? I was going to say Vodz. It wasn't Vodz. I can't remember the guy's last name, but we all know who I'm talking about. A very small heavyweight. He was a very small heavyweight Ukrainian guy whose knee blew out against Charles Martin. I subsequently never fought since, actually. But Parker was, he was going up the ladder. He was getting more of these fights in. He was fighting guys like Jason Padaway, Bowie Tupi. He was fighting these guys, getting rid of him. I remember that Bowie Tupi fight. I think that was the fight where he knocked him out, or was it the Daniel Mars fight? It was one of those fights where it was a really, really brutal knockout. I think it was kind of Joseph Parker. I think it might have been the Bowie Tupi fight, where Parker, it almost looked like the shot, it looked like it landed, but almost looked like a grazing shot, because he kind of caught him on top of the forehead, and it was kind of like a grazing right hand that landed. I mean, that he was out of it. And this one right here, the Arano Beta Costa Jr., I think that was the fight where Joseph Parker, it was almost like he threw a hook right hand, and I mean, he iced him. I mean, we were really seeing, like, people say Joseph Parker can't punch. Look at some of these early knockouts that he was getting, and you'll see that there was definitely a lot of explosive power there with Joseph Parker. He definitely had explosiveness in his shots, and he still does. That's why I say I think sometimes his technique But when you see and you hear them specifically, when you hear them in fights, which I'll get to later, I'll talk about then in a sec, you do hear that thudding bang, you know, when he lands it properly, even if it's landed on gloves. So that's how you can kind of get a feed that, you know, this guy does hit hard. It's just a case of being able to land it, having the right technique, being able to get maximum rotation in the shots. There's a lot of things that go into it. But again, Parker was defending that WBO Oriental title quite a bit. Jason Bergman, he fought, and I think that's the Jason Bergman, if I'm going to just double check his box rec, because Joseph Parker was fighting him in 2016, January 2016, and beating him with relative ease. That is the same Jason Bergman who damn near should have beat Trey Lippe Morrison until he had an injury. And it goes to show you the difference between guys. Trey Lippe Morrison, the son of Tommy Morrison. But May of 2016, this was really when Joseph Parker had his coming out party. If you want to correct me on this, you can, but at the time, it was on Sky, this fight actually. At the time, I am almost sure that this fight with Carlos Takam was a final eliminator for the IBF title, which had recently been won by Anthony Joshua. And I'm nearly 100% sure this was a final eliminator for a cracking Anthony Joshua. Now, in some ways, I feel as though this was a fight where Joseph Parker, he grew, but something changed in this fight. Because Parker had been blowing these guys out. Now, he learned a lot, definitely learned a lot from fighting Carlos Takam. And this was a much fresher Carlos Takam than who's gone in there with Joe Joyce, who's gone in there with Chisora, who was beat by Anthony Joshua. This was a much fresher. This was only a Takam who only had 2 losses. And, you know, one of them was obviously Povetkin. 2 years removed from that knockout loss, actually, a knockout defeat. So Takam was still quite useful. You know, he was still game, as you can tell by the scorecards, 115, 113, and 2 116, 112s. But Parker gassed a bit. He didn't he wasn't out of it, and, you know, he wasn't, you know, blown real heavy, but he definitely noticeably was getting tired in around the mid rounds. And I think this fight, because this was kind of like his first kind of, you know, first kind of time at world level. And I think this fight here made Joseph Parker stop and reflect on things, that he can't always just go in and, you know, let his hands go and the guys are going to fall over. Takam's a very, very tough man. You got to be able to hold something in reserve. And I think he took that lesson, but part of me feels as though maybe he took it too well, if that makes sense. That maybe it was a case of, when I get to this level, hold back and just use your boxing without really, you know, trying to stamp your authority on it. I think maybe that kind of could have been where that happened. Maybe that fight might have been the starting factor. Maybe it was always there. I suspect it probably was. But I think maybe this fight really made him reflect. Obviously, Joseph Parker was trained throughout his whole pro career by Kevin Barry. So, you know, he kind of had it. He was fighting in New Zealand, but training a lot in the States. He obviously had a fight then against Solomon Hamono. If I'm butchering these names, apologies. Again, defending his WBO Oriental title. And at this stage, he was actually getting a very good ranking with the WBO. His final fight, his final fight before he had his world title shot was against Alexander Dmytrenko. Dmytrenko was down several times, all through body shots. It was a real messy fight. Dmytrenko not exactly got the strongest heart in the world. He went down very easy from shots in that fight. He was down, up and down several times, but I believe they were all body shots. You know, they were all body shots. And that was that. Now, at this time, this was early October. This was, I think, just before Tyson Fury vacated the majority of his titles. So, at this time, summer of 2016, there was a lot of talk about Joseph Parker versus Anthony Joshua. There was actually talk of Joseph Parker appearing on one of AJ's undercards. I think it might have been the Molina undercard. In fact, actually, there was a lot of talk of, at the time, Joseph Parker being on the AJ Molina undercard and actually having a final eliminator for the IBF, you know, mandatory position against David Price of all people. I mean, cast your minds how that would have gone. Answers on a postcard, I think we all know. Because with the IBF, the way their mandatory was at the time, now it might have changed since then. Potentially it has, but at the time, even if you were in an 8-rounder and you lost, you'd lose your mandatory position. It was a kind of a rolling kind of thing, almost like defending a title. They might have changed those rules in subsequent time, but that was how it was at the time. So they wanted Joseph Parker to be on Anthony Joshua's undercard because they were looking to get that fight. Because at the time we didn't know what was going to happen with Tyson Fury, with the whole Klitschko situation. It was kind of, we're talking about the summer of 2016 where AJ was kind of, he had just the IBF title at the time. He'd just beaten Dominic Brazil. This is kind of when they were talking about all this. So it was talked, and I think some people were hoping that they might see Parker versus Price on one of AJ's undercards, which would then lead to AJ having his mandatory defense with Joseph Parker in 2016. Now, around about this time in October was when Tyson Fury really just went AWOL in the boxing world. Vacated the WBA, vacated the WBO, and those titles were fragmented. Now, at this time, Parker had a choice. Go through with the mandatory with Anthony Joshua, and I think the mandatory with the IBF is only due 20%, or face Andy Ruiz for the vacant WBO title, of which Joseph Parker was also mandatory for, which was now vacant, and get a decent split. I think probably would have been a 50-50 or maybe a bit more on Joseph Parker. I think Joseph Parker he definitely was number one a fight Andy Ruiz. Now the thing that his team, who I think was Duco Events, were talking about where, well, at least if we get to the WBO, we can have a unification with Anthony Joshua down the line. Alright, but provided you still have to beat Andy Ruiz. So he went in there with Andy Ruiz, both guys undefeated. Both guys had sparred in the past. I remember Joseph Parker saying when him saying this, when he sparred Andy Ruiz several years ago, years before this, I don't think he said he couldn't eat right for 3 days or something like that, his words to that effect. Now Andy Ruiz, I remember this was kind of when Andy Ruiz first started doing that kind of shenanigans with, photoshopping pictures, because there was a picture of Ruiz in the build up to that fight, touching his toes, and he looked like that. And when he stood in the scale, well, he was 255 pounds, looked the same way he always did. This was a really, really close competitive fight. For my money, Parker just nicked it. It was in New Zealand, just nicked it. He basically showed how you beat Andy Ruiz. Andy Ruiz, fast hands, slow feet, try and keep him at arm's length, try and keep him away, look to counter punch him. That's basically what Joseph Parker did. Obviously Anthony Joshua, when he did it, had a lot more success. He's a lot bigger, a lot longer, and Andy Ruiz was a lot heavier than Joseph Parker in that fight. But he ended up getting the win, pick up the WBO title. At this time we would have had AJ, Wilder and Parker as the champion, with the WBA, which was still vacant, which Vladimir Klitschko, there was talk about him actually facing Lucas Brown at one stage in 2016 for the vacant title. That never happened, thank God, because that wouldn't have ended well for Brown. Made no mistake about that. We ended up getting AJ versus Klitschko, which was a great fight. Now, instantly there was a mandatory called for Joseph Parker going into 2017. It was going to be against Hughie Fury. Now, subsequently, that fight was announced. It was going to actually, I believe, take place in April of 2017. It was going to take place in New Zealand. Now, issues with that were Peter Fury, the trainer of Hughie Fury, wouldn't have been able to go to New Zealand because of, I believe, criminal convictions and stuff like that. It's similar to how John Fury can't go to America whenever Tyson is fighting over there because of convictions. Now, there was talk that, this fight was kind of up in the air at that stage because no one really kind of knew what was going to happen. Because Hughie Fury is not as naturally confident, I think it's fair to say, as his cousin Tyson. Tyson, when Peter Fury as well, when he couldn't travel to the America for the Steve Cunningham fight. Do you remember that? He couldn't travel for that. So Tyson Fury had to go without. Tyson Fury did that. He went without Peter because Peter Fury was training Tyson at the time. Hughie is not... He doesn't strike me as someone who's made from the kind of stuff Tyson Fury is. No disrespect to him, but he doesn't appear to have that natural inner confidence that Tyson has. So there was a lot of talk that fight might get scrapped, and subsequently Hughie Fury apparently had a back injury and had to pull out. The fight would end up getting rescheduled, and I'll touch on that now in a sec, but Joseph Parker ended up facing Razvan Kajanu, who was 16-2 at the time. Kajanu was a sparring partner for Joseph Parker, and there's an old saying, familiarity breeds contempt, and it certainly did. I mean, I remember that fight, it was on Sky, it was on in the morning at about 11 o'clock, and it literally looked like a sparring session. The guys knew each other very well, and it just wasn't a fun fight to watch. It was a real dull fight. Parker was trying to land, Kajanu was being negative, and it didn't make for a compelling view. And Kajanu, I don't know how he ended up getting the shot at Joseph Parker at the time, because he only had It's only a couple of years before. It was it Donovan Dennis or someone, the guy who knocked him out badly, in 2 rounds, was Kajanu. So they move on from that. They do end up getting the Hughie Fury fight over the line. It was going to be a pay-per-view in Manchester, a YouTube pay-per-view. Do you remember that? It was on YouTube, pay-per-view. I think it was 15 quid on YouTube. It was going to be in the MEN, and apparently it absolutely, I think Tyson Fury even put up some of the money himself for that, which is one of the reasons why him, Peter and Mick Hennessy were having some issues. But he was going to fight Hughie Fury. The fight took place. It was not a very entertaining fight. Joseph Parker did not look good. He came in quite heavy for this fight, 245 pounds, and he looked heavy. He looked kind of... Joseph Parker's never been, cut like granite, or never been like shredded, but he definitely looked a little bit, I don't want to say fleshy, but he definitely, the weight wasn't muscle, put it like that. And he plodded all around the ring as Hughie Fury was extremely negative. Extremely. All he did was move. It was a kind of, like, when I watched that fight, and I watched it live, I thought Parker won just because Hughie didn't do enough. It was a case of maybe a jab here and there and an uppercut, but Parker was the one who was really trying to force the action, and I felt Joseph Parker done enough to nick the fight. One judge had a draw, the other two judges, Terry O'Connor as well, and he's had some bizarre scorecards over the years, scored it 118-110 to Joseph Parker. We got that famous Mick Hennessy saying, that was shades of Ali. And then that other famous saying where he says, I'm not being funny, but what the F is going on? I remember that. And John Fury obviously having his rant, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves, you political beep. Yeah, we had that was a lot of fun. It was more fun the afters than the actual fight. I remember Dwyer saying it was one of the best heavyweight fights he's seen in however many years. That's why Richard Dwyer is always going to be a legend. But anyway, we move on from that fight. That was the Hughie Fury fight. Then, I think it was the back end of 2017, it was announced the plan that Joseph Parker and his team had set out to do since they fought Andy Ruiz, or since they took that fight. It was going to be him versus Anthony Joshua, unification. AJ had got the WBA title after the Klitschko fight. Basically almost a year after the Klitschko fight, he'd be in there, Principality Stadium in Cardiff. AJ, Parker, unification. I was excited. I thought AJ would win, but I thought this fight would be quite competitive. It was a very hard fight to watch. All the build up, and it was a really hard fight to watch, because I can't help but feel if they had fought in summer of 2016, it would have been a better fight, because both guys would have been a bit less experienced at the time, and I think it would have been a better fight. Subsequently, we'll never know how that would have went. But AJ won. The scorecards were quite wide. I thought Parker had more than... He won a couple of rounds. Like, he won the first round, he won a couple of the mid rounds. So I thought he won 4 rounds. I remember at the time having it 116, 112 to AJ. The referee in this fight, Giuseppe Quattorino, done a despicable job. Absolutely despicable. Anytime these fighters got any remotely close, he was breaking them, and he wouldn't... Parker's advantage was that he had the quicker hands, and he was better at kind of close range to kind of semi-mid range. The referee negated that. Not saying Joseph Parker would have won the fight had the referee been a different referee maybe, but I reckon it would have been a lot more competitive. We would have maybe seen AJ have to, go through something, go through some crisis, because Joseph Parker could definitely punch it. We know AJ doesn't take the best shot, so it would have been a real interesting fight if we had a different referee. It really would have. It's just a shame that we didn't get a chance to see that. Not saying Parker would have won, make no mistake about it, don't misconstrue. I'm not saying, if we had a better referee, we would have won the fight. I'm not saying that, but I definitely think it would have been a much better fight than it was. It was a real hard fight. It was the first real fight we've seen from Anthony Joshua that was just like waiting for it to catch fire. It's not catching fire. Joseph Parker lost that fight, got a big payday for that, and then was in another fight 5 months later against Dillian Whyte. Now, this fight did kind of come out of the blue. It really did. At the time, Dillian Whyte was, I believe, he was still looking to go down the WBC route. This was actually for the WBC silver title, which Dillian Whyte had possession of at the time. But it was after the whole Kubrat Pulev IBF final eliminator thing happened. I didn't expect Parker to be announced. I thought he was actually going to fight Luis Ortiz, because they were teasing Dillian Whyte in a big fight. We all thought it was going to be Ortiz. It was Joseph Parker on a very good undercard. It was a brilliant undercard. This card was. It had so many good fights. It had Conor Benn versus that Paynow guy, Katie Taylor. It had Anthony Fowler. Who else did it have? Originally, it was meant to have Kell Brook versus a guy called Brandon Cook. That fight didn't happen. I think it was meant to have Sam Egerton as well. I think actually Sam Egerton was meant to replace Kell Brook in that fight, but that didn't happen. But we ended up getting Chisora versus Takam, which was the heavyweight fight of the night, in my opinion. And the main event was brilliant. But that card was fantastic. One of Eddie Hearn's best cards. Seriously, one of his best cards. Really was fantastic. And oh yeah, we Dave Allen versus Nick Webb on that. I remember that as well. It really was a brilliant card, that under. I mean, it was just... I remember that well. It was a very fun card. But the actual fight, the main event... Joseph Parker started that fight very well. The speed was apparent, and he looked to be having his way up until the second round, when he actually got... It was ruled a knockdown. It shouldn't have been. It was a headbutt that put Joseph Parker down. And he kind of just... He kind of just... How do I say it? He kind of just almost didn't try and win. If that makes sense. Even though he was trying to win, he didn't want to take the initiative. And it was really, he was just getting bullied by Dillian Whyte in the mid-rounds. He ended up getting dropped legitimately from a very good left hook, very powerful left hook from Dillian Whyte in the 9th round. And it was then late on where Joseph Parker did rally. He did rally. Dillian Whyte was spent by the 12th round. Joseph Parker landed a right hand. The back end of the 12th round, Dillian Whyte went down. Joseph Parker just didn't have enough time to be able to get rid of him. Dillian Whyte survived to the end. It was a close competitive fight. Dylan Whyte was the deserved winner, and I really would have loved to have seen a rematch. We may yet see it, who knows. But that was a back-to-back losses for Joseph Parker. He went back to New Zealand towards the end of 2018 and fought Alexander Flores. Knocked Flores out pretty savagely. And it was at this time he signed a fight with DAZN. Signed a 3-fight deal with Eddie Hearn Matchroom and DAZN. First fight was Alex Leopai. Had that in June of 2019. The less said about that, the better. Who was the original opponent? It wasn't Alex Leopai, wasn't it? No, it was someone else. Who was the original opponent? Was it Eric Molina? I think it might have been. I think it might have been Eric Molina. Because I don't recall Alex Leopai being the first opponent. I think it might have been Eric Molina. Anyway, Leopai was a pie, even in his prime. And I'm amazed he went 10 rounds, to be honest with you. I was surprised about that. I thought that was a 2 or 3 round blowout for Joseph Parker. Didn't seem much killer instinct. And this was something that we were saying about Parker around about this time, that he just seemed to kind of lack that ability to finish. Was out of the ring for a while. February 2020, fought a guy called Shondell Winters. None of us had ever heard of Shondell Winters at the time, but the majority of us hadn't heard of Shondell Winters at the time. No one really knew who he was. We knew he was old, by modern standards. He was like in his late 30s. And we were like, okay, let's see how this guy is. It was worrying how much success Shondell Winters was having. You could see he had a bit of ability, but he was just ancient and he was tiny. He was only 208 pounds in this fight. Joseph Parker, I think, dropped him in the 3rd and then finished him off in the 5th. It was, he did what he needed to do. He would not have a fight for the rest of 2020, but he would sign up for a fight in his native New Zealand towards the back end of February 2021 in an all-New Zealand clash against Junior Fa, his nemesis from the amateurs, the man who beat Joseph Parker. I think the record was, they had 3 or 4 fights. I think Parker only won 1. In around that, someone wants to correct me on that, they can. And this was like the 2 top heavyweight New Zealand meeting. Was on DAZN. I remember thinking this might be a good fight. This is really a showcase for New Zealand boxing, to see how it is. It seems like only yesterday that fight happened, actually, and let me tell you, it was not a compelling view. It wasn't. Joseph Parker won a 12-round UD, 115, 113, 170, 111, 119, 109. That was really wide. I don't know how they got it that wide. But yeah, it was not compelling viewing. It was a real lackluster of a fight, and Joseph Parker was the better fighter. It seemed that way, but he just didn't seem to have that initiative. He just didn't seem to... He was just happy to be there almost. And this is what me and several others were complaining about, that we see this fighter with a good chin, punching power, speed, good hand speed, good foot speed, strength. And he just glides through a fight. I'm happy to be here. And it was frustrating to see, because we know there's more potential there. Not long after the fight, Joseph Parker got on a plane, came to the UK, actually came to Dublin, actually, not the UK, came to Dublin to train originally for the first couple of weeks camp. Was announced that he'd be leaving Kevin Barry and signing with Andy Lee. Now, around about kind of, after he fought Hughie Fury, actually, funny enough, he got a very close relationship with Tyson Fury. The two of them are close friends, it seems now. They've even said that they won't fight one another. They're very close. They're like brothers almost. Andy Lee, cousin of Tyson Fury, now the trainer of Joseph Parker. He's in that kind of Fury stable. And, this is kind of what he was going to be, what he was going to be doing moving forward. Announced he would fight Chisora. It was a quick turnaround. I mean, it was only, basically March, because 28 days in February. And 2 months later, he was out there against Chisora. It was a really quick turnaround. His first camp with Andy Lee wasn't a full camp. The Chisora fight was lackluster. Parker made a terrible start. He was down in the first round. He did gain his composure, come back, outbox Chisora in parts, but it was a very close nip and tuck fight. He won a split decision over 12 rounds. And then it was announced not long after that he would be rematching Chisora. And we were all kind of like, really? Really? And I think, me personally, I was like, I've seen enough. I've heard him say, I've said this time will be different, this time will be different, this time will be different. And I didn't think it would be any different. But he weighed in a career heaviest 251. It did look like a lot of that was muscle, specifically in the shoulder region. He looked a lot more broader in the shoulders. And from the first bell, this was a different Joseph Parker. This was a more aggressive Joseph Parker. Seemed almost a more confident Joseph Parker. He was punching a lot more correctly. His technique was very good. He just looked a different fighter in there early on. As the fight subsequently wore on, it became apparent that Joseph Parker was the substantially better of the two, and that he could get Derek Chisora out of there. But that killer instinct just didn't seem to be there. That's to say, it won't be there, because Joseph Parker, now that he's under Andy Lee, does appear to be a lot more confident in his ability. He's a lot more aggressive than I'm used to seeing him. He seems a much improved fighter. So I'm looking forward to seeing moving forward what will happen with Joseph Parker. He went on to win a very close, by all accounts, decision, which is quite strange. I didn't see a close fight. I saw a very strong display from Joseph Parker, and I don't know how them judges scored it so close. That would make you scratch your head to think if those knockdowns were counted, which I think one of them shouldn't have been. What the scores might have actually been for that fight, it would have been pretty crazy. But moving forward, Joseph Parker, there is options there for him. There is potential fights with Filip Hrgovic. There's potential fights with Joe Joyce. There's potential fights with guys like potentially Michael Hunter, just to name a few. Potentially, I doubt it, but maybe a Dillian Whyte rematch somewhere down along the lines. If Parker is staying with Andy Lee, if he's working with Andy Lee, and he keeps improving to the level that I saw in that fight, let's forget the fact that he couldn't get Chisora out of there. Let's forget about that. Let's look at the positives and talk about what we're seeing from a technical point of view. We definitely saw improvements in Joseph Parker. So for me, moving forward, I think that Joseph Parker is on the right track. Joseph Parker could end up being like a fine wine, improving with age. Bear in mind, he's only 29 years old. It's not like we're dealing with someone who's in his mid-30s who you're thinking, Joe, you better get a move on. It's now or never. You've got maybe, 2 or 3 years of your peak? No, it's not like that. He won't turn 30 until next year. He's got plenty of time to work with Andy Lee, to get that little bit of killer instinct, to get that meanness into him. He wasn't getting that with Kevin Barry. He might be getting it now. He's in camp with Tyson Fury. He's in camp with confident people. Andy Lee has the Kronk style. He trained with Emmanuel Stewart, trained with Sugar Hill. I'm sure that, what was the thing about Kronk? What was the thing about Emmanuel Stewart? He loved knockouts. He loved guys to go in there and get rid of people. He used to, remember Klitschko against Chambers? How animated Manny Stewart would get, how angry he'd get that you can get rid of this. Why aren't you? Give Parker time with Andy Lee and we may see the killer instinct come out. I was happy with what I saw on Saturday night. I hope we can finally see Parker make the most of his ability, of which there is so much. Let me know your thoughts moving forward, what you'd like to see from him in 2022, and what you thought of this career review, and what your plans are for Joseph Parker, who you would put him in there with. All this I'd like to know in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed it. Last WTF of the year. We will do more next year. Adrian Broner, I will be looking him up. Well, I know about Adrian Broner already, but I'm going to make it a goal to have him as the first of the new year. Not saying when in the new year, but he'll be the first. That's my plan. That's my plan anyway. That's my video for today, peeps. I hope you enjoyed it. If you could, smash the like button. I do enjoy doing these videos. Hit the like as well. I already said hit the like, but anyway, if you could hit the like. It helps your boy out. Subscribe if you haven't already. We are literally 15 subs off, maybe less now. At the time of record is I'm 15 subs off. But tomorrow could be less, but we're nearly there, nearly at 6k. Help your boy out. Hit subscribe. For now, lads and lassies, I'll talk to you. Peace.